Hi everybody, Martin MacDonald here from Spokes, and I'd like to welcome you all to our public meeting on traffic reduction commitments for Scotland and Edinburgh. We've had over 100 people register, 50 have joined us so far, and we're very pleased to have such distinguished speakers with us tonight. You'll see the names on the agenda down below there. After I finish speaking, Dave Defoe will give a short introduction and tell us the purpose of the meeting and a bit of the background to why we're holding this meeting. And he'll then introduce the speakers in turn, who each have 12 minutes to present their information to us. That will be followed then with a Q&A session, which will be chaired by Sam Gardner, the head of the Edinburgh Climate Committee. During the meeting, you can submit questions using the questions facility in your control panel. You send those in, they'll come through to Sam and myself, and we'll do our best to group them together into logical topics and prioritise them. And then the speakers will have the opportunity to respond to them. At the end of the Q&A session, each of the speakers and Sam himself will have the opportunity to do a 3-minute summary, and then I'll close the meeting. So we're looking at finishing around about 9:25, depending on how many questions we get. We're up to 58 people just now. And we're also grateful to Cycling UK for hosting the event for us on their webinar platform, GoToWebinar, and for all the help they've given us in setting this meeting up. After the meeting, as soon as we can, we will be producing an article on the Spokes website with a summary of the meeting, and the meeting is being recorded, and we'll be posting a link to the video of it as well. I think that's all that I needed to say, so I'll hand over to Dave now. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome again to our Spokes public meeting on traffic reduction in Scotland and in Edinburgh. Personally, I was frankly amazed when the Scottish Government announced its commitment to a 20% reduction in car kilometres by 2030 compared to pre-pandemic levels, because politically it's extremely challenging. Car use has for years been in a growth spiral, encouraging and being encouraged by road building, by running costs being reduced in relation to public transport, and by on-road conditions which increasingly deterred non-motorised travel. People who have benefited from this spiral will be reluctant to see it reverse. Our meeting tonight is a contribution to the government consultation on a route map to achieve the 20% commitment. We hope the meeting will inspire you to respond to the consultation and will help Spokes in formulating our own response. The meeting is also a contribution to Edinburgh Council on its own similarly ambitious 30% target. There are council elections on the 5th of May. It's important to speak to councillors and candidates about the need for bold action. Politicians get plenty negative input about measures to restrain car use, so they need to know if you support them. Spokes will be launching our own manifesto for the election next weekend. It includes traffic reduction measures and will of course be on our website. Use this to get ideas for speaking to candidates. The Scottish Government's 20% commitment was announced as part of the December 2020 climate plan. So, whilst traffic reduction will have many additional benefits, the commitment is primarily a response to the climate crisis, and the term crisis is appropriate. As we can see in Britain and around the world, in the rising pattern of storms, flood, fire, melting ice, and disruption to nature and to agriculture. It's often not appreciated that our CO2 emissions remain in the atmosphere for literally hundreds of years, other than what dissolves in the oceans with equally disastrous results. So every year that emissions continue, even at a reduced rate, total CO2 in the atmosphere grows and the impacts worsen. This is why urgent action is needed. And the 20% car kilometre reduction is just one small step of many which are needed here and around the world. However, in addition to its intrinsic value, it is also being referenced as an example by academics and campaigners outside Scotland. Tonight's meeting is about achieving the reductions in Scotland and in Edinburgh, and without delay. For Scotland, we're all conscious of the almost total failure of the government's 2010 target for 10% of all trips to be by bike by 2020. Actions totally failed to match up to the words. The present intent does seem stronger. We have a draft route map with a good analysis of the problem, and we have big cash rises coming for active travel. But it is now a year since the commitment, and traffic is now developing new post-COVID growth trends. The political challenge remains huge. Furthermore, the draft route map feels weak on the most important drivers of change, making car use reflect its true environmental and social costs, and reallocation of road space, in other words, demand management. For Edinburgh, we're all conscious that it took literally 8 years for work to begin this month on the Council's flagship CC West East City Centre cycle route. There's a recent post on the Spokes website which details the twists and turns of objections, political disagreements, staff cuts, antiquated government regulations, and consequent further delays and cost increases. Now, however, the climate crisis is increasingly confronting us, and failures like the 2020 bike use target or the 8-year CC World delay must be a thing of the past. Today's speakers and debate must display the level of action and determination which are now vital. So with that background, let's move on to our speakers. Patrick, could you put on your sound and video, please? As Martin mentioned, we've asked the speakers to stick to 12 minutes or so to leave the second hour for your questions and panel debate. I'm delighted that our first speaker is Patrick Harvie, who is the Scottish Government Minister with responsibility for active travel, zero carbon buildings and tenants' rights. You may think that is rather a mixed bag. However, I'm sure Patrick is very aware that zero carbon buildings require decent bike storage and active travel routes to them. And every tenant surely has a right to those also. So over to you, Patrick.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Dave. Thanks, first of all, for pronouncing the entire job title, which saves me about half of my speaking time, I think. We have these ridiculously long job titles now, but also thanks for recognising the fundamental connections that I'm convinced that there are between the different elements of my role. I'm delighted to be the first minister in the Scottish Government with active travel specifically, explicitly in my job title, and I hope that that gives you confidence that we're raising the importance of active travel, not just in terms of bigger budgets, but higher status and priority within the government's approach. And I'm grateful to you for the invitation to speak and recognise that while the Minister for Transport will have overall responsibility for that 20% target for car kilometres reduction, there's a great deal in my portfolio of active travel which is going to be critical to achieving it. And I'll be able to work very closely with Jenny, who's just come into post as Transport Minister, to make sure that we move ahead. For the first time, this is a new one on me. I'm having to ask somebody else to change slides for me because I'm using a separate device. So can I get the next slide, please? And hopefully this will all work. Yes, it does work. Fantastic. So the political cooperation agreement that we're in that the Scottish Greens and the Scottish Government signed last year, and that's given me this privileged opportunity to be Minister for Active Travel. That agreement committed to increase the active travel budget to at least 320 million. That's 10% of the total transport budget by 24-25. And we'll be doing that in stages. We're already seeing big increases coming in year by year. And that record investment is going to really kickstart our ability to expand the delivery of active travel infrastructure, as well as behaviour change programmes and access to bikes across the country. It's going to accelerate progress toward our ambitions for an active nation and the commitment to reducing car kilometres. It also sets out in that agreement a number of other road safety actions, which are also going to help people to feel safe when walking, wheeling and cycling. A Safe to School initiative to ensure that every child within 2 miles of a school can walk, wheel or cycle there safely. The 20-mile-an-hour working group was set up in December to help explore the parameters to determine how we're going to roll that out more broadly. And I'm really delighted to see that a decision has been taken by Glasgow City Council just last week to move forward with a really ambitious approach on 20 mile an hour as a default. And we'll also have a national speed management review. That will encompass a pilot project with Police Scotland to develop online reporting to enable anybody to upload camera footage of dangerous driving. This kind of initiative's got real potential to make a big difference to driver and road user behaviour, as well as road safety across Scotland. And the update to the climate change plan also saw an extra £50 million committed to active freeways, segregated active travel routes on main travel corridors to town and city centres and to major destinations. The aim of all of this is to give everybody the confidence to invest in large-scale programmes, ambitious infrastructure, many of which will span several years and which will support many more people to walk, wheel and cycle much more often. And in that context, the agreed need to evolve to deliver the current active travel agenda. There's a consensus, I think, that existing delivery models for active travel aren't necessarily scalable and probably aren't what we would design if we were designing it from scratch. So we've got a really critical moment of opportunity now. We're not just wanting to pump money into this agenda for the sake of it. We want to really maximize the impact. And if we're going to do that, we have to make sure that we have a delivery model that works on the scale of change that we need to achieve. So we've got a transformation project that's been launched to try and look at how we maximize the opportunities for active travel delivery in the short and medium term. And we'll be saying more about that when we bring a debate on this to Parliament in the next few weeks. Can I get the next slide, please? Young people, I think, want to participate in active travel, but we need to make sure that we remove the barriers, that we give them the support and the safety that they need. So one example of that is the free bikes scheme. We want all children of school age who can't afford bikes to have access to them. I'm delighted to say that we met the 100-day commitment to introduce pilot schemes. We need to learn about the wide range of ways of delivering that policy, and the pilot schemes, one of which I visited just today, are going to show us how we can manage that as best we can. And the benefits of increasing access to bikes for children are really obvious. It's sustainable, but it also ensures equality of opportunity in building life skills, confidence and independence, and it embeds healthy life choices from an early age. The policies that influence active travel are much more wide-ranging than the active travel portfolio on its own. The sustainable investment hierarchy is part of the strategic transport project review, and that's going to aim to reduce the need to travel unsustainably by informing future investment in transport. The National Transport Strategy also prioritises active and sustainable travel, including public transport and the government commitment to reduce car kilometres by 2030 by 20%. Can I come on to the next slide? As Dave said in the introduction, Scotland's transport, its contribution to to climate change, to the climate emergency, can't be ignored or overstated. Cars make up almost 40% of transport emissions, and those transport emissions are about a quarter of Scotland's total. So the Scottish Government's intention of reducing car kilometres by 20% is going to be really, really significant. It is being recognised around the world as an important commitment to achieving the level of ambition that's needed across Scotland to reach those net zero targets. I don't think it's unfair to say that we are conscious that we cannot meet our wider net zero targets without achieving this change in how we use road space, in how we get about. And so the commitment there really has to be up to delivering that. The draft route map that was published earlier this year, accompanied by a statement from the then Minister for Transport, sets out the way that we plan to meet that reduction and encourage that move away from private car use and toward public and active transport. Next slide, please. So the sustainable transport hierarchy, the sustainable travel hierarchy, sets out the change in priority that's needed to reduce emissions. To support that 20% commitment, we know that walking and cycling needs to become the preferred mode of transport for short journeys, and cycling has to be a viable mode for both urban and inter-urban journeys. And to support that, we're tripling the budget for active travel, so that, as I said earlier, at least 10% of the transport budget is going to be spent on active travel by 24-25. And we've also got over 250 walking and cycling infrastructure projects nationally that are already being progressed through the Scottish Government funded Places for Everyone programme. But while the majority of the funding is delivering walking and cycling infrastructure, we know that infrastructure alone won't increase the number of people walking and cycling. We need to do much more than that. So we've also allocated over £6 million of the 21-22 budget toward successful behaviour change projects, so that people in Scotland have got access to the knowledge, the information, as well as the confidence to walk and cycle more. Next slide, please. Issues around, have we got the next slide? Yeah, issues around inequalities is also a key area of focus for the route map. We want to make sure that the options for reducing car kilometres include everyone and highlight the sustainable options for everyone in society to make changes to the way that they get about. The groups that are known to have the least access to private cars, this won't come as any great surprise, I suspect, to this audience, are people on the lowest incomes and those with long-term health problems, disabilities, as well as younger and older people, women and minority ethnic groups. And the worst effects of car use, whether it's air and noise pollution, road danger, community severance, congestion, those effects fall disproportionately on the most marginalised people in our society. And also the attractiveness of active travel alternatives is also impacted by these effects. So feedback from the public shows that the speed and volume of traffic stops people walking and cycling. That feedback has shown the need for investment in ambitious on and off-road segregated walking and cycling routes, as well as safer junctions. Next slide, please. I'm not sure if I've missed a slide. I'm gonna carry on with the script I've got. I'm not sure if we're on the right slide anymore. When people are given the choice between the different policy measures, modal shift toward public transport is generally seen by the public as the fairest and most favourable, and reduced car use is a principle behind many of the recommendations that have been chosen. So people who were surveyed as not being willing to reduce car use, their main concerns were around things like convenience and affordability of alternative transport options, and safety was an additional barrier which they highlighted as an obstacle for active travel options. Next slide, please. Are we on? Okay, we're on slide 8. I should be on slide 8. I don't know. I'm going to carry on. The route map that's been developed using a behaviour change approach, and that behaviour change happens in a context. It's not something abstract. It happens in the context of the social and material and economic environments in which people live. So we need to make it easier for people to adopt different ways of living, better ways of moving about, by creating that context where reduced car use is more normal, is easier, is affordable, and the alternatives are attractive and work for people for their individual circumstances. The interventions in the route map have been chosen in light of what the evidence supports as being effective, as well as the insights from some of the community engagement work that we've already undertaken. Next slide, slide 9. The route map has been developed around a framework of 4 behaviours at an individual level that are intended to reduce overall car kilometres. First, making use of sustainable online options to reduce the need to travel. And that can be hugely important, especially for rural and island communities. And it's obviously something where people throughout the country and everywhere around the world have gained a lot more skills in the last couple of years in using some of those options. Next, choosing local destinations, again, to reduce the distance that you travel. So people can have access to goods, services, amenities, social connections within their community. And that not only benefits the environment, but it also offers the chance to revitalise local economies and have strong communities. Then we've got the switch of mode to walking, wheeling, cycling and public transport wherever possible. And we need to do more to make that possible everywhere. And the increased use of active travel also has that extra benefit in terms of physical and mental health. And the final principle is around combining trips and sharing journeys, again, to reduce the number of individual vehicle trips, even if a car remains the best option for some people in those circumstances. Can we go to slide 10? So I've covered that active travel and public transport play a really essential role, as well as demand reduction in reducing our need to travel. But we know from places like the Netherlands, who've got an incredible attitude to cycling, that there needs to be a carrot and stick approach. We should be, okay, my script here says I should be looking at a graph on this slide, slide 10, showing the Dutch model, where despite their high percentage of cycling in comparison to the UK, CO2 emissions are still high. Cycling does offer a wide range of benefits to the community that we live in, but we also need to disincentivise car use to get the emission reduction that's required to support statutory climate change targets. Both increased cycling and active travel and decreased car use have got wider co-benefits as well. And I'm saying slide 11 now. I think I'm kind of giving up on being on the right slide. I hope everybody's following this somewhat. The evidence that we have is really clear that car use is only going to be reduced at the scale and pace that we need by introducing measures to manage demand. And Dave reflected on the need to be ambitious on that, not just incentivising modal shift to walking, cycling and public transport, but demand management as well. The current tax regime for car use is a major barrier to the decarbonisation of transport, with fuel and vehicle excise duty reserved to the UK government. Now, the UK have acknowledged that in their recently published net zero review, as we transition away from fossil fuels and the taxes that are based on them, structural changes to the tax system are going to be required. The Scottish Government has asked for, but is yet to receive any clarity at all on whether and when those plans to change motoring taxes are going to come forward. So the Scottish Government is exploring research into what our options are, and we need to look at what those options are, whether or not the UK makes those tax changes that I've talked about. So we've committed to the development of a new framework for car demand management by 2025. We do want to see from the UK government a tax system that better incentivises the transition to zero emission vehicles and protects future revenues to fund policies that can support a shift to more active and public transport. Whether or not they go with that, we're still committed to delivering on that 20% car kilometre route map. So I'll finish just by reminding you that the consultation is open via Transport Scotland on that route map. So I want to encourage you all to respond to the consultation. It closes on the 6th of April, when responses will then be reviewed and analysed, and that will inform the future policy development that we have ahead of us to achieve what we all know we have to, which is that reduction in car kilometres, as well as the boosting of active travel and public transport. Thanks very much. And I'm sorry if we got a bit confused in the slides.
Thanks very much, Patrick. That's great to hear your talk. It's good to see you put so much emphasis on disincentivising car use, or as you called it, possibly accidentally, decarbonisation. However, the disappointment was that you mentioned that the policy document's coming out in 2025, and I think in the QA and the debate at the end, that may well be a point that people wish to raise. It seems a long time in the future. Anyway, thank you very much, and we'll look forward to your participation in the QA. So if you could put your sound and video off, and Lesley, if you could appear on the screen. I mentioned in my introduction that politicians who act boldly on measures which impact private car use often suffer negative feedback. Well, I think that's putting it mildly in the case of what Lesley has had to suffer. But despite that, we hope the Council will continue such policies and that we will see them increasingly on the ground as well as in policy papers. And that will be essential if the 30% car kilometre reduction is to be achieved. So over to you, Lesley.
Thank you very much indeed, Dave, and thank you also to Patrick, because it's my happy job to say right at the start of my presentation that the City of Edinburgh Council under its current administration is firmly behind the approach that's has been outlined by Patrick. I think we're all in agreement that we have to have policies that align at both national and local level, as in the case of Edinburgh, and that we need to be as fast as possible in our implementation of both strategies and actions. Here in Edinburgh, we have recently gone for a much bigger target of 30% reduction in car kilometres. We're still working out how we do that. There's a paper coming back to my committee in March, which will outline the mode share targets that we're going for in order to achieve that. But I think it's a clear recognition that an area like Edinburgh, capital city of the country, major urban setting, has more to contribute to that national picture than perhaps the people who live in the Western Isles or the north of Scotland can do, because we have all the benefits of being in an area where we have easy access to facilities, to the things that we need to access, and that we have far more options in terms of sustainable transport at our disposal. I think we can probably all agree that there will be no one single action that is going to take us towards the kind of ambition that both Patrick and myself have just been expressing. It is inevitably going to be a range of actions, a range of strategies, a number of different levers that we can press that will take us to that particular level. I think we need to look at it both in terms of the carrot and stick, as Patrick was mentioning, but also we need to look at it on the national, regional and city levels to ensure that what we're doing is, first of all, all properly in alignment, and then secondly, actually benefits that has a sort of synergistic impact, positive impact on that. I think sorry, if I can ask you please to move to that next slide. Thank you. That reinforces what I've just been talking about. The 30% target for Edinburgh before 2030, the net zero target, net zero carbon targets we've got are looming very large for this administration. We're very conscious of the need to move as quickly as we possibly can in the environment that we're in. Could I go to the next slide, please? Now, clearly, how on earth do we achieve this? I mentioned a number of different action points that we've got, and I suppose one of the clear ones, which might be quite familiar to quite a lot of the members of this audience, is our city mobility plan, which we've already passed in this administration. We're now moving quickly into the implementation stage. It's a long programme, it's a 10-year programme that we've got, and clearly COVID has thrown us off a little bit, but we are moving as fast as we possibly can to bring forward the kind of actions that will help to meet the kind of ambition that we've just been discussing. I really just wanted to talk a little bit more about the City Mobility Plan at the moment, because although obviously we're here to talk about one specific aspect of it, which is traffic reduction, it can't be looked at on its own. It's got a whole variety of aspects to the City Mobility Plan that we need to take into account. So, you know, it's about people making sustainable choices. It's about equal access to the city. It's about public health and well-being. It's about what we're asking of our citizens and how we go about doing that. And when it comes to the question about movement, it's all about sustainable and integrated travel. It's about safe and efficient movement. It's about clean air and energy use, and it's about managing demand, which has already been touched on and we'll no doubt come back to. So in terms of what that does to the places that are in Edinburgh, the key aspects of what we've got. So examples of that will include the council's shift towards a 20-minute neighbourhood concept. Now, clearly that's not just to do with transport, that's to do with where we site council offices, where there's access to particular facilities. All of that is getting behind that 20-minute neighbourhood, and that's running throughout all of our policies in the council at the moment. It's absolutely necessary to take that integrated approach to ensure that people can access the facilities they've got on their doorstep without the need to consider transport beyond that of walking, wheeling or cycling, where they don't have to consider how to get to a far-flung distant access point. Our city centre transformation is a project that is well known, I think, to this audience. There's a lot in that. I won't go into too much detail on that. There's too much to do. But you'll know that, for example, we've got our recent George Street and Newtown project, which has been going through various stages of consultation and development. It's going through the rebus different stages. And that is going to deliver an absolute jewel in the crown and a real signal about how we are going about changing the city towards a position where people are in the position to actually contribute to that reduction in car kilometres, because what we're representing there is essentially a car-free environment that encourages people to walk and to cycle and to wheel through that area, and will serve as a really good example of what is possible with high quality funded placemaking in that case. Moving down the rest of the slide, we're looking at the low emission zone, for example. That's yet another action that we're taking with the help of the Scottish Government in order to see what is it we need to do to try and reduce the impact of car and transport efforts within the city. The impact of that, we know, around air quality is enormous, depending on the figures that you look at. Between 200 and 300 people per year lose their lives prematurely as a result of air pollution. Those are the kind of things which are driving some of our public health thinking around some of the actions that we're taking. And that will inevitably ask people to, again, ask themselves the question, how should I best be accessing, in this case, the city centre, and it will have a positive knock-on effect across the rest of the city. Should I be travelling sustainably? Should I be using public transport? Should I be leaving my car behind? And we all, I think, understand what the answer to that last question should and can be for many, not all, but for many. I'm also pleased to raise, for the first time here with Spokes, the issue of our fully funded active travel investment plan, which has recently come through our committee. We are looking to spend over the next 5 years £118 million of planned expenditure on active travel. Can I just point out that that is more than our roads budget for this last 5 years. We had a budget of 100 million on our roads. We've actually spent 112 because we've been able to add to it through various means. But over the next 5 years in the next administration, we're planning to top that for active travel alone. That's quite a remarkable shift for this local authority and will have a really positive impact on people's ability to choose. We also, of course, are looking at transport network investment, and we have a useful policy that looks at building to building, wall to wall. So that includes, of course, pavement and cycle path facilities. Within our city mobility plan, we've committed to, for example, segregated cycle paths on all of our key arterial routes. We're partway there, courtesy of Spaces for People, but we're looking at that as a long-term investment That will form part of the major capital works that we do on roads. So that's clearly part of our thinking as we go forward. And then lastly, I'd like to mention the circulation plan, which is being worked on by officers at the moment. It will take some time to emerge into the public, blinking into the sunlight of public scrutiny. But that's a really major piece of work, which is really looking at how we best can manage the flow of vehicles and people. And I say it in that sense because we are talking about every aspect of moving around the city. It also, of course, covers freight movements as well. And that is something which will be part of a consultation as we go forward on that particular piece. The city mobility plan, to return to it, that is the overarching piece that we have that informs so much of what we're going to be doing over the next 5 years, assuming that the administration stays in the same progressive environment. And it's all about that sustainable, safe and efficient movement of people and goods. And it absolutely plays to this reduction in car kilometres goal. So it also tackles climate emergency, it tackles poverty, transport poverty, it targets inclusion as well as all the obvious aspects around congestion. As a focus within our city mobility plan really on behavioural change and infrastructure to support sustainable travel, which is quite clearly an underpinning to people making different choices about car use. It also embeds that 20-minute neighbourhood concept that I was talking about before, and all the placemaking opportunities that can come with that to improve the quality of infrastructure that people enjoy in this city. It sets the framework for a series of detailed action plans and projects. I've mentioned the George Street one, for example, but there are all sorts of other aspects around road safety, around active travel, as we mentioned, around public and accessible transport that all play into that. Could we go to the next slide, please? I think one of the aspects that I've talked about just very briefly, and I won't linger too much on it here, is a question of regionalisation. We have to be very aware that we are a real honeypot for car transport into the capital city. How do we manage that? How do we manage that in conjunction with our neighbouring local authorities? What aspects of transport management can we bring to that? Many of you will have noticed, for example, the bus lanes that are now appearing on the last few miles of the M8 coming into Edinburgh. That's something we value enormously. I think that will be a real game changer for a lot of people who are commuting into the city from further afield, because suddenly they'll realise that the bus represents an excellent way to actually access the city. And I hope that that will then bring that shift and we'll see fewer cars coming into the city. I've talked before to this audience about the issues that we have that sit around two key areas. One is in-car commuting, and then the second are short journeys undertaken within the city. Are those really necessary? Can we reduce those down? And that still relates to the topic that we've got here tonight. Could we move to the next slide, please? I mentioned earlier on about the how, what we're doing, but clearly what we have to understand is why we're trying to make these changes. What is our baseline to measure those changes and the effectiveness of our actions against? And really to be able to begin to describe to people what it is that we expect in terms of change in the city. Clearly that big part is the mode share targets. We've had some, over the last few months, we've had some really effective collaborative working with spokes, with Living Streets, with Edinburgh Bus Users Group, with the Confederation of Passengers Transport, and a number of other stakeholders, really to inform what is a very complex process. We'll be bringing a paper back in March to Transport and Environment Committee, so it's a little bit early for me to be talking about the specifics attached to it. My apologies for that. I would rather have been able to speak to some of the very specific information in that. But I hope you can see how we're moving towards understanding what we need to do, what effect we're looking for, and how we reach there. So what does Edinburgh City Council really need to make these real changes in Edinburgh, the changes that will help us meet that 30% car kilometre reduction target? I mean, clearly, I mean, be the first to say it, we need ambition and we need political will. And we need that both within the council, but we also need it with those that we partner with. And that can be our neighbouring local authorities. It can also, of course, be the Scottish Government. But we need to find a way to quantify that, to understand it, and to clearly define for the people that we serve what that ambition is. We also need properly funded investment programmes. I've just talked to you about our commitment of £118 million to a fund which is currently funded to our active travel investment programme. That's a real leap forward for this local authority to be able, for me to be able to stand and say, we've passed this, it's gone through committee, this is our commitment for the next 5 years, is a day that I never thought I'd see. Because as we all know, making change around active travel tends to be incremental, it tends to be difficult, it tends to meet with quite a lot of opposition, as well as support, but opposition. And so for us to be able to stand there and say, this is what we've got, is a very clear indicator to anybody watching this discussion about the direction of travel for this city, and how quickly we want to make change. We also know that it has to go beyond active travel. It has to be investment in Lothian Bus. It has to be encouraging them to be able to continue with the very good offering that they've got around public transport. We have to look at tram, not only the extension that's currently being built, which is in budget and on time at the moment, but we also have to look at trying to expand that if we can. A north-south tram line would make an enormous difference to the number of people choosing to go by safe, reliable, sustainable transport rather than making car choices, for example. And then, of course, there is the issue about active travel. We also have to have the right strategies and action plans, immersion those strategies in place. I firmly believe that we've gone a long way in this administrative term, but we're not at the end of that. There will always be more strategies that we can bring forward that look at particular aspects of what we're doing or find new and creative ways to push forward faster. We also need to look quite effectively at changes to the legislative framework that we're operating in. It won't be news to this audience. The frustrations that sit around, for example, the City Centre West East link that was being referenced earlier on, are real. They are a very big problem for those of us who are working within the council to try and make progress. When we can see a project like that, which has so much value and can be a real game changer in terms of the offering that we make to people for safe cycling, for example, and indeed improved walking facilities. For that to be derailed by essentially one objector for a number of years, where does the balance lie in that? It doesn't lie with those who are trying to make progressive change. It lies with those who want to halt it. And it's something which we have to be very careful about going forward, because if not, we could find our ability to deliver towards our 2030 net zero carbon goals or our reduction in car kilometres seriously derailed in a period when we cannot afford to have any slowdown in progress. So I think we need to find a way to examine all of the legislative framework that impacts on us, that would allow us to find easy routes to the end results that we're getting at, whilst building in.
We're getting a bit tight on time, so. Right,
I'm going to finish then, just in a few more sentences and I'll be finished, Dave, so my apologies. So we need to find that legislative framework and find a way to work through some of the very serious issues that sit within it that allow local authorities to make progress. We also have to look at the application of the right levels of resource within local authorities. I'm very pleased to say that we've just augmented our active travel team. So we now have a team of between 17 and 19 working on active travel at any one time, which is a big investment for us as a council, and again as an indicator of how seriously we're taking this. And then very lastly, and I won't go much further on this, but we clearly need to promote behavioural change. We do that through the provision of excellent infrastructure that allow people to make that change, and we do that through constant discussion and encouragement for people to try new ways of getting around this city, ways that don't impact negatively on them, the public health issue, and ways that provide real benefit to the communities that they live in by their own individual choice. And I'll leave it at that point. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much, Lesley. That was great to hear. It's good to hear about the investment programme, etc., and all the policies. Although I think what people are waiting for is seeing some more of the policies appearing actually on the ground. Hopefully after the election we'll see more of that. So if you could turn off your sound and vision. And Caroline, if you could appear on the screen. Now, for anyone who is a regular at Spokes public meetings, you'll know Caroline as a superb chair of our QA sessions, but today she is here instead to critique what we've heard from the two politicians. So was what we heard enough? Or, to paraphrase reggae artist Johnny Nash, are there more questions than answers? Caroline will no doubt let us know. So over to you.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks to Patrick and Lesley for setting out very clearly the work that's going on at national and at local level. In order to make this sensible for folks at home, I thought I'd talk first about the things that are good, and then we'll come on to the elements where we might have some room for some discussion and, you know, maybe a bit more homework that needs to be done. All right then, so starting with the good things. So I think the route map, the national route map and the city mobility plan are both excellent in terms of the multiple policy strands that are set out. So it isn't simply a strategy about car reduction, it is a number of strategies that deal with the same issues. So we've got national planning framework too, we've got policies on 20-minute neighbourhoods, we've got the rollout of 20-mile-per-hour speed limits. We've got work on the NHS estate. We've got the digital and broadband rollout as well. Patrick, I think, mentioned that earlier. At the local level, again, 20-minute neighbourhoods, but parking strategies, bus strategies, city centre transformation, the local city plan as well, the new development plan. These multiple policy documents all pushing in the same direction are a good thing, because delivering this is not a silver bullet, it's not a one-trick pony, it requires action in many different settings, and there are many strands to that. So I think setting some of that out, mapping it out as it is in the draft route map and in the local documents, the Edinburgh documents, is a really useful place to be, to show those linkages. So that's a good start, I think. The second thing that I think is really positive is about the funding. And we've heard Lesley talking about that 118 figure, wonderful. And that's really good to hear. And of course, Edinburgh was, I think, the first local authority in Scotland to commit a significant proportion of its active travel or of its transport budget to active travel, and now we've seen the same thing at national level. Again, Patrick mentioned that earlier, so that 10% target by 2024-25. So significant amounts of money available in a way that they've never been in the last 10-20 years. So we've had policy before which has been about doing these things, but we haven't had the money to do it. And I think that is a really positive step, really positive step. And so my third positive thing is that we now have some very clear goals and targets. We've had targets before, of course, which we've missed, but again, having those targets is useful, because if you don't have a target, you can't measure your progress. So I would like the 2019 baseline to be a little bit clearer. It's quite clear in the Edinburgh policy documents and approaches, but less clear, I think, at national level, although it is there. And I think Edinburgh has done a good job with its baselines. It has got baseline data about how people were travelling in 2019 in order that we can measure how those traffic reduction, interventions shape up. So are they making any changes against that baseline? And some of you who know me in my professional life know that I'm interested in data, and I think there are some questions about data which we might come on to later. So that's my third positive, was about that targets and baselines. The fourth thing I think is about at the national level, that conceptual framework. We didn't really talk about it or hear about it earlier, but I think the document itself does a very nice job of explaining how we think people change and the model that we're using to try and shape people's behaviour. And I think that's a really useful thing to have. So it isn't simply a collection of random ideas about how we change people's behaviour, but it's actually underpinned by some research about the sorts of things that make a difference. So it's about providing opportunities, it's about understanding, you know, the things that shape behaviour and the opportunities that we need to create to make that change. And I think that's a really useful thing to have in that document. At the city level, we don't have that kind of model, but we do have much more work about implementation with timelines. So the City Mobility Plan has an implementation section which maps out the individual actions and the timelines for delivering those, although we've already heard from Lesley, some of those have slipped. All right, so I think all of those things are positives, but let's move on to the things I think where we might have a little bit more to think about and discuss. At the national level then, I am a little bit worried that many of the things that are in the route map do not have specific timelines against them. And it feels a little bit, in some cases, like there's a lot of jam tomorrow. We've already heard that that demand management strategy is not due until 2025. The route map itself was supposed to be published last year, but didn't come out till January. So we see this creeping of the work, and it's going at quite a slow pace behind the scenes. And I am worried about that for the 2030 deadline, waiting until 25 for that demand management strategy, when that's absolutely critical to delivering these targets. How much can we do in 5 years when we've got the strategy in place? Why can't we have a strategy in 2022? And then we've got 8 years to meet our targets. So I'm worried about that. And I think we have to set this into context against the continued investment of the Scottish Government in road projects. So we can talk about share reform, we can talk about other things, but we see at the same time as this really useful route map, continued investment in the billions of pounds in road projects. Okay, so let's move on. Other things we might talk about is about timelines. So although we've got timelines at the city level for implementation of the mobility plan, we don't have the same timelines at the national level for some of these the delivery of these targets. And we also don't have, I think, a good sense of how fast some of these things can be delivered. So when we're talking about spending more money on active travel, how much does that money buy, and how quickly can those projects be delivered? We know, Lesley's mentioned it, other people have mentioned it, and the TRO process is rather, complicated, let's just say, and it can go on for a really long time, and that is completely ridiculous. If we're going to meet a 2030 target, we're spending money on active travel, but individual projects take 6 years or 7 years or even 3 years to deliver. That does not move the dial quickly enough against the 2030 targets. So I think there's a real problem here about mapping some of these targets and projects and interventions against this idea of time. How quickly can things be implemented? So that's one question that's unanswered. Another question that's unanswered here is which interventions will have the biggest impact? And this comes back to data. Patrick's talked about data, Lesley's talked a bit about data, but I think having a good understanding of how previous interventions have shaped behaviour will give us clues about which of those interventions, so providing information about buses, providing access to safe routes to schools, which of those things will deliver which changes and how quickly will they deliver those changes. So which things should we do first? Yeah, which will have the biggest impact and get us closer to the 2030 targets. So that's another thing. So data, and I think that's true at local level as well as national level. Because we've had previous interventions, so we've got 20 miles an hour in Edinburgh, and let's look at, ask questions about what the impact of that has been and how that fits into this. Skills and resources. Lesley's mentioned the expansion of the active travel team, which I think is really good news, but I think that's missing from the national level. This route map is quite ambitious, but how do we deliver it? It isn't just money, it's also resource and skills. And some authorities are forging ahead. Glasgow's doing some lovely work. We've got other places also doing some really nice things. But what about the local authorities that are struggling, that don't have the skills and the resource? How are we going to push them? What's going to be happening there? So I think skills and resources is really important, is missing from this. I think these things about the timelines and the priorities, which things will have the biggest impacts, the data that underpins that, the issues about regulatory timelines and processes apply at national and local level. And of course, the local level can't fix the TRO process, that's a national thing. So there's lots of shared questions there. And to finish, I've got 1 minute left. To finish, I want to leave the panel, Patrick, Lesley, with some homework, which is to suggest that we should look to Wales. Transport for Wales and the Welsh Government have been extremely bold and fast moving in the work that they are doing around transports. They stopped an expansion of a major road project, the M5 expansion project. They stopped it at a very late stage, much to the public's consternation, but they stopped it and they said it is not compatible with our other policy goals around the future well-being of future generations, carbon reduction, net zero. It's not compatible with those things. They have now set up a national review of all roads projects with really clear criteria for reviewing every project. So they stopped and they've stood back. That's my timer. So let me just finish. And their Burns delivery unit. So they've done some work. They've had a review. They set up a delivery unit a year ago. The delivery unit is now consulting on 2 projects. So within 12 months, it's moved from thinking about it to doing it. And those 2 significant infrastructure projects are around a railway station, 7 Tunnel Junction station, and a new active travel corridor between Cardiff and Newport. So there is some work to be done, some homework to be done in Scotland, I think, and Wales is showing us the way. So could do better.
Thanks, Carolyn. That was great. That was some real meat for the debate and for Patrick and Carolyn to take away with them. I was really interested in the timeline stuff. I think that's really important. And the road building as well. It reminded me, many years ago, Edinburgh Council had let the contracts for the West Approach Road, which was going to be a motorway right into Lothian Road. And there was an election, the next council was elected with a promise to scrap that. And even though they had to pay quite high penalties, they did actually scrap it. And people are asking now, the Scottish Government has got an ambition to cut car kilometres by 20%. How come you're spending millions of pounds to build new roads to cater for a 20% reduction in car use? Anyway, that's all for the debate, I'm sure. So if you could switch off, Caroline, and yeah, the announcement slide, that's great. Well, this is a great opportunity for me to show off my spokes buff. Here we are, featuring part of the Spokes Edinburgh map. There are several interesting and useful events coming up. For details of time and place, I'm not going to give that now. Have a look at the Spokes website. Click the tab called Spokesworker and you'll find our latest member circular, which gives all the details. So this Saturday, February 26th, there's the next critical mass ride. Sunday, the 6th of March, there's going to be an open-air cargo bike tryout event with lots of stalls, including a spoke stall. Friday, the 11th of March, in the evening, there's the Our Streets, Our Nights ride, which is calling for nighttime cycling infrastructure which is safe for women. And then on Monday, March the 28th, there will be the spokes hustings for the council elections. And details for that will be on our website in a week or so. So the spokes member circular, which I referred to, also includes bike route developments and consultations, etc., which you can respond to. Finally, when you go to the spokes website, if you're not already a member, please do click the membership tab. By joining spokes, you'll get our roughly monthly member newsletter, email circular, telling you about local and national cycling developments and events, how to make your voice heard and how to push for improvements. So David, if you could take the slide down now, thanks. And we'll move on to our QA session, which is going to be chaired by Sam Gardner. So Sam, if you could put on your video and sound, please. As Martin said, at the end of the QA, probably around 9:15, the speakers and Sam himself will each give a brief summary of what they've learned and their takeaways from the meeting. Sam, as Martin said, is head of the Edinburgh Climate Commission. The Commission is a high-powered group of experts and leaders aiming to accelerate climate action in the city. It's sponsored jointly by the University of Edinburgh and the City Council, and you can find out more about it by Googling Edinburgh Climate Commission. Sam himself has a massive record of work in sustainability and climate issues, including with WWF, with the Scottish Government, now as the Head of Climate and Sustainability at Scottish Power, and as already mentioned, Head of Edinburgh Climate Commission. Finally, before I hand over, I need hardly add, Sam's Twitter profile suggests that his favourite means of getting about is his bike. So over to you, Sam.
Thank you very much, Dave. Many thanks for the invitation to join you this evening. It's a real privilege to join a spokes evening, and I'm just sorry that it's not in person. There's lots and lots of questions coming in, so please bear with me as myself and colleagues behind the scenes are trying to kind of sift through them and organize them and give them some kind of structure. I think I'm also to invite the panelists to appear and turn your cameras on so that I can direct questions to you, so it's not just myself that everybody can see for the next half an hour or so. So Caroline kind of kicked off, and I'm sure has spurred another whole suite of questions that will be coming in, because there's lots of chunky themes there to kind of unpack and get into. I wanted to just start by reminding ourselves, and some of you will be very aware of this, and some of you it might be new, but back under the Scottish Executive as then was, this isn't the first time we have had a traffic stabilisation target. Sarah Boyack, champion of sustainable transport and transport minister at the time, championed a target to stabilise traffic levels in 2021 at 2001 levels. So we've now passed that, and I think it's safe to say that we didn't meet it. So we've been here before, kind of, because nothing stays the same, and the context is very different. And to this audience, I suspect everyone's very aware of, maybe not all the examples from Wales, but the number of examples that are happening from across Europe about how the pandemic has accelerated the adoption of active travel, and whether it be in Milan or in Paris or elsewhere, you're seeing a shift that's happening across Europe. And so we are definitely part of something. And that certainly wasn't the case when Sarah championed this target back in 2002, as I think it was. Let me just check. Yeah, 2002. So we've had targets before, but the context is very different now. And that certainly gives me optimism that we'll make much more progress than we have done previously. One of the themes that's come up in the presentations, and one of the themes that's come up in the questions, is all about pace. the pace of change that we need to see. And there is the eye of the needle that needs to be threaded by politicians in response to the climate emergency, which is to act sufficiently fast to address the climate emergency, whilst at the same time maintaining the public mandate for that action. And I wondered, just as a kind of opening kind of scene setter, how, in the case of Patrick and Lesley and then Caroline, how can we go faster? Because I think it's accepted that we've not historically gone fast enough. You've outlined increased funding, you've outlined steps that have been taken, but equally, I've got a bunch of questions. A question from David French, for example, that talks about the balance of carrots and sticks being in favour of carrots. Do we have evidence that that kind of emphasis has actually played out and been successful elsewhere? And if not, do we need to shift that balance? So my question is, how can you give confidence to this audience that we are going to actually go faster in the next few years, particularly given what Caroline said about this delay with the framework until 2025? So what encouragement can you give that we're going to be able to move and see change at pace that's commensurate with the public health crisis and the climate crisis? And first of all, can I go to Patrick, please?
Sam, you've asked a hugely important question, and I'm sure it does relate to questions that a great many people will have asked as well. In a sense, you know, I'm slightly torn on this question. That I have pessimistic days, and I have more optimistic days. Have we, not just in Scotland, not just the UK, but globally, have we left this too late? I honestly don't know. It's very clear that nothing we do now, nothing that came out of the COP in November, nothing that's in our current programme for government in this 5-year term, is really going to get us to where we need to be. Because to get to where we need to be, we had to start 20, 30, 40 years ago when the fossil fuel industry was pumping out lies and conspiracy theories around the world. And they are the reason why this could not have been done slowly. The very deliberate effort that was taken to prevent the world from acting early and acting slowly is the reason we're now using language like climate emergency and saying this has to be done fast. To do it fast is really, really difficult. It's potentially expensive. It's disruptive to people and to people's lives and can be challenging for people to accept. And can often risk being unfair as well. So to do this fast and fair, to do it fast and fair and with consent, it's an incredible challenge. So I'm not going to sit here and say that I know for sure that we've got all the answers. That would be dishonest. But I wouldn't be taking part in government, and my party wouldn't have signed an agreement if we weren't convinced that the appetite is there to start making the changes that have been put off for far too long. On something like you know, the road building programme, you know, I was reflecting on those earlier road traffic reduction targets. I was elected around about that time, and then those targets were scrapped. And since then, transport has been a policy where politicians are only allowed to offer more of what you're used to already, and it's much more difficult to offer something that's about change rather than just I'll build you another road. When I was first elected, we were trying to stop the M74 Northern Extension, right? 5 miles of urban motorway in Glasgow on concrete stilts, disconnecting and severing communities. And for a price tag that would have been transformational if you'd spent it on public transport, on active travel, on pavements and cycle lanes and so on. So it was a massive opportunity missed to have taken those different decisions now. I accept that, you know, that we are making this change much later than it should have been made, but the principle of predict and provide is now dead. That is no longer Scottish Government policy to just predict road traffic demand and build the capacity to cater for it. And the expenditure that we're going to make on any new road projects that go into the pipeline from this point on will be subject to tests about not adding more capacity to the trunk road network. It's perfectly legitimate to spend where it's about safety, where it's about maybe taking some of the worst air pollution out of residential areas. There are legitimate, and maintenance as well, good grief. If we've got a road network, we need to look after it so that it's usable for everybody, buses, bikes, and everybody else. So there is spending that has to happen on the road network, but it is now going to be subject to much more serious tests about sustainability and compatibility with that transport hierarchy. I'm not going to pretend to you that we're making that change as early as it should have been made. I wouldn't believe that if I said it, and you wouldn't believe me either. But that change has now been made to the way that we're going to make transport decisions in the future, and I think that's shown if you look at the even the Strategic Transport Project Review that just came out recently. That the kind of content in that is a world of difference from the similar documents that came out previously.
Thank you, Patrick. This will be as much a discussion as it is a kind of direct Q&A, and we may want to come back to the things like the M74 and other examples of where that test is being proven to be fit for purpose and where we're stopping things, or are things getting through. The whole idea of a net zero test, I think, is gaining a lot of traction, not just here in Scotland, but elsewhere. Lesley, can I kind of pose the same question to you? And if I might you might want to touch on, one area I think is particularly important that I'm super conscious of in Edinburgh is the public engagement and the public mandate piece that needs to be retained and strengthened throughout this exercise if we're to go faster. Bearing in mind, in Edinburgh, we need to go about 12 times faster than we have done over the last 2 decades to meet our targets.
Nothing like setting me a challenge there, Sam. Thank you. I absolutely concur with what Patrick was saying, which is that we're starting later than we should have been. We do have to move fast, and we need to dismantle the barriers to action that sit around us. We referenced earlier on the legislative framework. That's one of them. The other piece is public perception and engagement. We've witnessed in the last couple of years under the Spaces for People in Edinburgh a real skewing of the conversation around the maintenance of the status quo and the preservation of privilege versus progressive change. Now, I think it's a really difficult thing to bring out to the public on this, because almost inevitably a lot of people do not like change. So how do we get across the idea that change is necessary to benefit everyone? And that's a really difficult task to achieve as a local politician. It's difficult to achieve at a national level as well, but it's a combination, I think, of change that we have to demonstrate, we have to talk to, and we have to persuade. So my own feeling is that in many ways we've progressed the conversation through the difficulties of the Spaces for People project. I think we have been able to say, yes, we hear the concerns, but here are our answers to it. We have demonstrated a willingness to absorb some of the concerns and to make quick changes. I was speaking to my Glasgow equivalent today in a meeting this afternoon, and we were talking about that kind of change in perception. And now it's no longer a question of should we do something, it should be a question of how do we do it, rather than go back always to the is it right for us to have a green agenda, for want of a better phrase? Is it right that we should put in more sustainable transport? The resounding answer that comes back to us from the public, except for some notable and loud quarters, is yes to those questions. So how do we take those loud voices, which are quite frankly magnified? In the case of our local authority, they are magnified by opposition politicians who choose not to understand the benefits that can come from the development of active travel options, of greater public transport options, all of the things that we've been talking about today. They choose to maintain the status quo for short-term political purposes, and they're backed by, quite frankly, a sometimes quite hostile press on a local basis. That's a really difficult thing for local progressive politicians to keep pushing against. I had a meeting not that long ago with the council leader, and we were talking about the fact he'd handed me this portfolio as a brand new councillor. It's the biggest portfolio of any councillor in the administration. And his comment to me was, it's kind of eaten you alive, hasn't it? And I think that is, first of all, I thought it was a very unchivalrous approach to the fact I'd aged a lot in the last 5 years. But secondly, it is actually indicative of the degree of conflict that sits around these issues. And we have to find a better way to try and understand the real balance that sits in our communities, not to be driven by the loud voices that want to protect parking, for example. I will name and shame at this particular point, because we have one example here in Edinburgh on Lanark Road, where approximately 90% of the houses have driveways. We've put in a safe segregation there for everyone to use, including a lot of children accessing nursery schools with their parents, accessing sports facilities and so on. And we are being driven by a few loud voices that say this is unacceptable. Well, what is acceptable? Is death and fear on our roads? Is a closing off of opportunity for people to make choices about sustainable transport? Is that acceptable? I don't think so. So we have to find a way to rebalance that. We do it through a number of routes. I think we certainly do have to look at the legislative framework and how easily local authorities can move within that to achieve what they're setting out to achieve. That is absolutely clear. And we have to be bold about certain aspects. The continental zebra crossings, for example, has come up recently as a topical subject of choice. It's absolutely clear that that is a game changer in terms of prioritisation of pedestrians and the safety issues that sit around that. It concurs with the highway code changes that we recently, well, when I say changes, they're actually not really changes, but reinforcement, shall we say, of priority within the highway code. These are the kind of things that as local authorities, as a national government, we should be working with to try and break down those barriers I referred to earlier. I suspect I've gone slightly off topic and I've ridden my hobby horse. So my apologies, Sam. But I just wanted to illustrate some of the blocks to progress. It speaks to Caroline's points about timeline and progress, and we have to dismantle those barriers as quickly as possible, because if not, we will not meet our 2030 goals. I don't want to leave local government thinking that we've not made as much effort as we could have done. And that's the issue that we've got there. So, sorry.
Thank you, Lesley. I did pose a very kind of open question, so I'll afford both you and Patrick big long answers to those, but in future I'll try and come in and keep them short. Caroline, did you have anything to kind of come back on both of those kind of comments?
Let me just offer 2 or 3 little thoughts. The first one is, we haven't talked yet about potential consequences of the new eligibility for free bus travel for young people up to the age of 22. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see how that changes travel behaviour. So it may well be that itself may have a significant impact on driving in that young age group. So I'm conscious, as someone who sometimes hangs around a university, you know, that is going to potentially benefit quite a lot of university students. So they won't have to fork out for a bus pass, they won't have to drive themselves, they can go free on the bus, and that could be, you know, that could change things quite significantly in some places. Not everyone's got a university, but Edinburgh's got 4. Second thing is that public engagement, public opinion thing. I think we have to get much nimbler about that. So we are asking the right questions. So we stop asking, what do you think about this? We ask people's experiences and we say, these are the options. This is what we're doing. We're delivering this policy objective, which loads of people like. They've said 75% of people or whatever have said they support measures on active travel. So we're not going to ask you about the principle. We're just going to ask you how best to deliver it. And then you can say, it would be really tricky here because there's kids that need to cross to this nursery. And then we can make the design work for the kids that cross to the nursery or whatever. But it isn't the principle that we're asking about, and we need to get much better at that. The third thing, I happen to know a little bit about some architects and developments and people who are thinking about new housing schemes here and there. And I saw recently a proposal for a fairly large residential scheme somewhere in the central belt-ish. And the developers were saying this will be car free and will have 100% bike parking. And I said, that's pretty much 1,000 bike parking spaces. And so I think, you know, there might be some other things that are going fast and maybe going ahead of the policy. But isn't that interesting? A developer looking at new residential scheme, some of it would be student housing, some of it would be mainstream housing, including 3-bedroom families flats, but no cars, all bikes. Isn't that interesting? And there you go, some optimism for you, Patrick. I'll stop.
I think, thank you. And examples like that are music to ears, and optimism is what we need, because this won't be some wonderfully sequential, beautifully chronologically kind of choreographed process. There will be examples of great practice, and then there will be things that jar and look distinctly out of place, and we need to kind of build on the best practice. So making a kind of really chunky kind of link between that and a question from Callum Cook, who's asking about the extent to which the 20% reduction target has been based on, or there's been modelling done within the Scottish Government to show the extent to which policies get us to that target. And perhaps, so I'll pose this question to Patrick in the first instance, but then I'll come back to Lesley and Caroline and maybe ask about the role of pilots in particular and learning through doing, and being a bit nimbler in that sense, to how we can demonstrate the achievability of these things through practice as much as through modelling. So Callum's question, which I posed to you, Patrick, is to what extent have Transport Scotland actually conducted the modelling needed to demonstrate how the policies that are required to meet this 20% reduction in car kilometres? Do we have that evidence base?
I mean, I would say to some extent. For example, the conclusion that we are going to need some form of demand management is pretty solid, and there's been external research conducted that's informed some of the decisions that have been taken. And you know, I appreciate and actually empathise a lot with the frustration around timescales on stuff like demand management. We're not just doing nothing up until 2025, so that there is already work happening with Cllr and with local authorities to see what options they have in the shorter term. So it's not all about the legislation that would come later on, but to do that properly, we do need to link it up with what the UK will at some point announce that they're doing on taxation. I would say that it's probably fair to say that because this is a consultation, we are looking at this range of policy options rather than saying precisely this exactly is the formula and this is what we're going to achieve. And there are probably some who would make the case that the carrots are going to be more effective. I personally might say that there needs to be a little bit more of a balance and a little bit more of a willingness to use sticks alongside carrots. But you know, I think a lot of that will come out in the consultation, and if those views do come out in the consultation, then that will, if it's not impolitic of me to say this, that will strengthen the hand of those of us who are trying to argue for the approach that we think is necessary to achieve this. I think what there is a very clear commitment that this target will be achieved. This is not going to be one that gets scrapped the way the last one was. We're going to have to do the stuff that is going to be difficult, and that the Daily Mail will, you know, print their headlines about the war on motorists, and the Conservative group and sometimes others in Parliament, you know, take something really, really simple like the workplace parking levy. Such a tiny measure, such a really, really modest measure. Let's allow local authorities to consider the option of how they might wish to design a workplace parking levy if they think it's going to. And you had these people throwing their hands up in horror as though we had just announced that, you know, every private car in the country was about to be confiscated. So we're going to need to have some robust decisions about the kind of unpopular things that we might do, as well as trying to change what the public expectations are, so that we make the things that are necessary more popular. And sorry, I know you wanted us to be brief. The last thing I'll say is this public consent issue, I think, is about public participation. It is about public engagement, done the right way, because that's also not just about informing us about what are the precisely right ways to implement this. It's also about taking the rug out from under those who want to manipulate this into a politically divisive populist issue at local level. This is too easy to present as a polarized, you know, bikes versus car parking spaces kind of issue in a way that just gets, you know, gets people their face into the local newspaper, but doesn't take the policy forward at all. So that public participation is going to be critical. But yeah, it's too soon to say precisely which measure is going to achieve precisely what proportion of the 20% tunnel.
Okay, thank you, Patrick, and appreciate your efforts to keep your answers so close to my time limit, because we have 26 questions and I think I've managed to ask 2 so far. So although your answers are covering up multiple questions, so that's great. Caroline, I'll go to you next, if I may. Perhaps I said to Lesley, but I'll come to you, just trying to mix it up a bit. And the question was there really about whether or not the policies have been modelled to get to it. But I wondered if you might want to say something about the value of kind of learning through doing and how we can get better at that in particular, which feels like it's going to be a critical part of this kind of emergency response.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think Spaces for People showed that we could use experimental traffic regulation orders to put in temporary schemes. What we didn't do well, I think, in Spaces for People was, you know, talk about that, because lots of people saying, oh, they look terribly awful, you know, they don't look very nice on Morningside Road, so let's rip them out. And that was the wrong, you know, that's the wrong conversation to have. What we needed to have at that point was then, how do we make this look nice? And how do we address some of the, you know, the issues that people were worried about? But the aesthetics was not the point. They were temporary things, and we need to get much better at that. And I think there's a huge opportunity with 20-minute neighbourhoods and with local place plans and a lot of the things that are embedded in National Planning Framework number 4, which is also under consultation. So if you fancy doing some more consultation, filling more things in, you can do that one too. But NPF 4 also supports these things about stuff at the local level. And I think when people start to see that there are opportunities for them in their neighbourhood to think about and talk about and get something delivered locally, which helps to improve the quality of their lives, then we can start to make some of this meaningful and that can join up. And I think this is one of the reasons that I started by talking about that. It's really positive to see these plans linking to so many other things, because they do link to so many other things. And the problem we had last time round, and I remember campaigning for the Green Party and Friends of the Earth in their 1997, so it was the Westminster Bill and the Road Traffic Reduction Act, which then came with Sarah Boyack's work into the Scottish, onto the Scottish books in 2002. That was the problem. It was on its own. It wasn't across other policy documents and other policy strategies, and that's the difference now. So there's a huge opportunity with 20-minute neighbourhoods and local place plans to link this together with this. Let's experiment. What happens if we put in a modal filter? How will that help the kids getting to school? How will that help the people needing to go to the GPs or get to the park? Those sorts of things. And I think that could really work brilliantly, but it is going to take a bit of time.
Thanks, Caroline. And so, Lesley, kind of in the same area, but I wondered, to what extent do you feel you now are beginning to have the stories to be able to tell about changes that are being made in Edinburgh? And are we collectively doing a good enough job of being able to communicate those stories in and around Edinburgh in order that we can begin to kind of build some momentum, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we go around? So what more can and should we be doing in order to point to best practice, whether it be from examples from within Edinburgh or further afield, in order that people take confidence that these changes are meaningful and will have a positive legacy on their lives?
one of the things I keep getting told as a local politician is that Edinburgh is special. It's too hilly to cycle, it's too wet to walk, you have to have a car to drive to the shops and to park directly outside the shops. Now, there are many aspects of that I have some degree of sympathy with, particularly when I get off my bike at the end of a 5-mile ride home and I'm soaking wet. But much more importantly, I think what we have to do is create space for those who require, for example, car access, i.e. blue badge holders, for example. That has to be absolutely critical in terms of how we support people in the community and to go about doing what they want to do. But we have to also challenge these myths about how we can make change and how possible it is to make change. And we do that by looking at other cities. We'll do that by looking at Paris, at the moment is just steaming ahead. I speak a little bit of French. I'm contemplating going and knocking on the mayor's door and saying, let me in, I'll come as a job intern, let me in, you kind of thing, because it's amazing to see the positive change that they're able to effect. And they're able to effect that by demonstrating the benefits of schemes. Now, I've had in my recent experience a couple of quite interesting aspects. I'm told repeatedly, usually by opposition councillors, but also by local business people as well. And it expresses a very real fear that people have, which is that if you take away car parking directly outside an area of shopping, you're going to decimate businesses. We know that there is so much research out there that says almost exactly the opposite, which is that if you allow greater space for people to mingle, to access, to really enjoy a shopping area by foot, by bike, by feeling, then you actually see usually increased expenditure, different way of interacting with the shops and so on, and actually the businesses on the whole will benefit. It was very interesting. I brought a paper forward a couple of years ago to my committee, specifically an answer to that particular kind of question I kept getting thrown at me by opposition councillors. Remarkably, that has gone quite quiet in internal council conversations. It's still present because I understand very well that local businesses will make the assumption, very understandably, that a lot of their business comes by car, and you have to prove that isn't the case. You have to prove that people should have confidence in alternatives. The second part, the other example I've got is around public health. I brought forward a motion in last autumn to ask for a committee report that looked at delivering a real understanding about the public health inequalities that relate to transport. And they're very real. Now, our officers are doing an amazing job at the moment about pulling together a lot of that evidential base. And that's something which we'll get into the conversation inside the council around that. I think it's by doing those kinds of initiatives that we can really begin to answer some of the regular questions that come back again and again. However, we can also demonstrate by doing. So, for example, you asked right at the very top of this set of questions, Sam, about what pilot projects are around. We had, before COVID disrupted it, we had a year-long process of open streets around the High Street in particular. And we were beginning to see change in people's behaviour there. People were coming out and actively enjoying the High Street because we were closing it off. We were beginning to see that kind of evidential base that we could then have used to take elsewhere in the city to say this change is positive. We're at the moment in terms of consultation, we're going through 2 potential low traffic neighbourhoods, one in Leith, one in Kirchtorfen. We're going through that process. Again, I do genuinely believe that if those are put in place, they will demonstrate very clearly to communities around the rest of the city that the fears about lack of access, about what the change in nature to the area will prove to be unfounded. And we only have to look at some of the boroughs in London to see exactly that the fear is there before application goes in. You go back and talk to people a year later, the fears have evaporated and the benefits have come to the front of the discussion. So there's a lot of that we're trying to implement at a local authority level. So it's show and tell, and it's also dismantling some of the myths that sit around the reasons not to make change.
Thank you, Lesley. Okay, I'm going to try and ask, try and encourage you to be super specific in response to a couple of questions at least. So a question from Bridie from Inverness. which is how can we ensure that measures and some of the examples that have been talked about in relation to Edinburgh in particular are rolled out in a way in other cities around Scotland. So again, it's kind of touching on what you've just been talking about, Lesley, but Patrick, in your role as Minister for Active Travel, is there, and if you could keep your answers short, what steps can be taken to ensure that we are sharing learning from across Scottish cities?
It is a tricky one. I think the SDPR acknowledges, for example, that our dense urban environment where you've got very, very heavy flows of people moving about are places where you're probably going to find it much more easy to get people to switch from one mode to another, away from private car use. They're also probably the places where people have already got a number of choices, perhaps more so than some of the rural areas. I can't remember who it was. Was it Caroline who said some local authorities are really struggling? I think that's true of some. Some aren't struggling at all because they're not bothering trying. We need to acknowledge that there are some local authorities that are showing real leadership. There are some who want to but have barriers, and there are those who are not even at square one yet. Now, I'm in a privileged position in a lot of ways in that I'm going to be able to put much more money into this budget. I don't want to end up at the end of the session only having funded the local authorities that already showed a lot of kind of eagerness and creativity at the start and help them. I do want to help them, but I don't only want to help them and have the rest of the country all saying, where's our share? But I also don't want to throw money into the black hole of areas where that ambition just isn't going to be shown. So yeah, one of the really critical areas is how do we bring along that local leadership? How do we foster and cultivate local leadership? I'm personally strongly of the view that it has to be about empowering local communities. And we don't always do that, even where we have investment going in, even where we have good active travel projects going in. Quite often communities don't feel that they've had the ability to shape it, the ability to really take the lead, because it has to be done by this big organisation or it has to be done by the council. I think by empowering communities, I think that's how we will generate the demand, the political demand at community level that will result in those councils that haven't yet shown eagerness actually pricking their ears up and saying, people want this. Okay, so that I think is what we have to cultivate and foster, is that local community leadership that will put pressure on local politicians far more effectively than a regulation signed off in Edinburgh.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm going to move onto another question, which is a kind of bit of a theme. There's been at least two questions that relate to the role of electric vehicles in the urban environment in particular. And Lesley, if I can just ask you, the question is phrased along the lines of, are the costs associated with electric vehicles greater than the benefits? So I'm sure you can get the kind of thrust of the question. Can you say a little about how you see the role of the private car, particularly in a decarbonised net zero world, when we've got to 2030, what role it has to play and where EVs fit in that? And again, if I could encourage you to be succinct, that would be great.
You can encourage me, but I can't promise anything. I will try.
I may start interrupting, but then, yeah.
Electric vehicles are a thorny issue. I recognise absolutely a lot of the arguments about for example, the carbonates produced through the manufacturing process, as well as the lifetime use of electric vehicles. I think there are enormous benefits to electric vehicles in fleet management. I think that's where I see the biggest benefit coming. I don't see an enormous benefit to us as a society in simply replicating the number of cars that are run on fossil fuels at the moment with the same number of electric vehicles. We have to somehow break that link and, yes, use electric vehicles where appropriate. For example, mobility vehicles, I can absolutely see the benefit of that. But do we want to have every family replace their 2 current fossil fuels with 2 electric vehicles? I don't think so, because it doesn't do us anything. It doesn't do anything to help us around congestion. It certainly has pollution issues attached to it still, despite the sort of headline benefits of electric vehicles. And it also produces another whole seam of street infrastructure, which brings with it issues attached to it as well. We are, however, committed at Edinburgh to putting in electric vehicle infrastructure, both in residential areas and to service fleets. And that's ongoing at the moment, a little slower than it should have been for a number of reasons, but we are recognising the requirement for that. But I do not believe that electric vehicles are any kind of panacea for the ills that we have on our plate at the moment.
Thanks, Lesley. And Caroline, I think you were indicating you'd like to come in. And if I could ask, perhaps if you could extend your answer to include possibly a question that came in from Stella Thompson earlier on by email, which was relating to the kind of explosion in home deliveries that we've seen. Maybe this is taking it a bit of a leap, but with the pandemic and having lots of things delivered, what role do they have to play in that kind of last mile delivery space, and how is there a role for electric transport in that space in particular? So yeah, do come in off the back of what Lesley had to say, and then if you could extend it to that'd be great.
Do you want me to go first or Patrick?
Yeah. Yourself, please. Caroline, okay. You.
So I wanted to come in here and say, when we talk about electric vehicles, we must remember that you can get e-bikes. And the brilliant thing about e-bikes is they make cycling more accessible to a wider group of people. And it makes it easier to do things like move children, or to move other people, or to move goods. And that last mile freight thing, there's a huge opportunity there. And I know there's some interesting projects going on with Sestran and others looking at the potential of cargo bikes and delivery hubs and things in cities to try and, you know, really move the dial on those home deliveries, the last mile thing. So I think we just need to remember that EVs are not just cars and not just a direct replacement. So that's definitely, absolutely, Lesley's got it on the nail on the head. It's the wrong idea to think that we're just all going to have electric cars and that's going to be fine. We have to see EVs as part of a different way of doing things. So e-bikes are in the mix, e-buses, e-taxis, and mobility as a service. So this, you know, the city car club thing. So I can foresee that we could have this integrated transport app ticket that I can use to get on the tram, get on the bus, using a taxi, or to hire my car to drive when I have to drive because I'm going to IKEA to get flat pack furniture or whatever it is. So I think mobility as a service, so it's seeing EVs as part of that, quite a different model of mobility in the city. And e-scooters, that would be also, you know, another part of that picture. So just to broaden it out from that, over to Patrick.
Yeah, Caroline, you should have seen me on my bike with packages from IKEA precariously strapped on the back the last time I was there, going through the Clyde Tunnel. Yeah, I mean, I was going to make a similar point that electric vehicles cannot be, as Lesley quite rightly said, cannot simply be a replacement like for like of an unsustainable transport mode, because that will still be unsustainable, albeit in different ways. It will still be unsafe, albeit in different ways. It will still sever communities, albeit in different ways. And in some ways, it would even risk people thinking, well, I bought the EV, I've done my bit, check, I don't need to think about it anymore. And actually making other kinds of change harder to achieve. But while it can't be a like-for-like replacement of the private car-dominated transport system, there is a lot of diversity in what kind of vehicles would use electric power, and of course there are going to be powered vehicles and they're going to be using electricity, not fossil fuels. So let's look at the diversity of that. The only additional point I was going to make is the connection through to employment, because a lot of the folk who are doing the deliveries on e-bikes at the moment or on conventional bikes, a lot of the people who might be doing last mile deliveries, if we see a much greater use of that, are on crappy employment conditions. You know, really poor conditions that not just poorly remunerated, but precarious and huge pressure to do the most that they can in a limited amount of time. and that places them in an impossible position of cutting every corner, using the pavements, maybe unsafely, not because they want to, and not because they're bad people, because they're under unreasonable and unbearable pressure. And so I think we really need to find ways to make sure that they have a voice as a user of the road network and of active travel infrastructure. They don't really have a voice at the moment. They're not at the table when we look at kind of stakeholder groups for active travel. They're not part of the conventional kind of cycling lobby or what have you. And they're not a very, very highly unionized workforce either. That's beginning to change. And a couple of the unions have done really good work at starting to try and get unionized. But it's a precarious workforce, and therefore it changes a lot. And so even if you do get a cohort of folk joining a union for a while and making a change, 2-3 years down the line, you've got a completely different cohort of people doing those jobs in the city. So finding ways to give those people a voice and make sure that they are working in conditions that support them to use those travel modes sustainably and safely and respectfully, that's hugely important.
Thank you, Patrick. We're now 9:15, and I'm sure everyone would like us to, despite it being a really rich discussion, finish at 9:30. And I think you were forewarned that you'd be asked to do kind of a 3-minute summary, and I'm actually going to make time 3 minutes, so I can be confident that we're sticking to it. You say what you want to say in the 3 minutes, but I think certainly what I would like to hear is, how can we have confidence that we are not going to be replicating the mistakes that we've made in the past with what will be stranded assets if we're no longer following a predict and provide model? How do we ensure that that isn't going to be the case, and we're not currently building challenges for ourselves down the line? So that's a kind of challenge, if you like, that you could choose to engage with in your summing up. So if I could go, and I've not forewarned you in this order, but given Patrick was just speaking, I'm then going to go to Caroline, Lesley, and then Patrick. Sorry, Caroline, I'm sure you're very able to kind of offer something. And then, yeah, in that order. So Caroline, Lesley, and then Patrick, in 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Okay. So I think the takeaway for me from this evening, there is a lot of really positive work happening. There is lots of potential, and those 2030 targets are, I firmly believe that they are achievable, but we have to move fast. And there are, as Lesley said, there are some barriers getting in the way, and we need to work out how to get around those barriers and remove them. And some of that work needs to be done at national level, and some of it needs to happen locally. So at national level, we do need things around regulatory processes to be brought into line and to be consistent with the sustainable transport hierarchy. So if we're putting in things which are making walking conditions better, they should go through fast. And if we're putting things for active travel through, they should also go through fast. But road projects should not be the priority. And I think we should, at national level, like Wales has done, have a reflection on the 7 billion quid that's going to road projects from the Scottish budget, and think about, as you said, Patrick, the transformative change that we could make if we put that into communities, into local things that made people's lives better. Healthy, sustainable, zero carbon. I really like what you're saying about equality, and I think that's a really important part of this. We know that kids, that women, that people with disabilities often lose out because the investment that goes in perpetuates the existing patterns of movement and behaviour. And I think having that being talked about is really, it gives me hope. And we've got Infrasisters and people talking about how we make infrastructure safe for women and girls. We've got lots more work going on with young people and engaging them in policy process and talking to children. And that's really important, and that gives me hope. So I have hope, but we need to be agile and nimble, and we need to get on with it.
Brilliant. And with a minute to spare, so thank you very much. So Lesley, over to you, please.
I think at this point I could earn myself some serious brownie points by just saying what she said, because in fact a lot of what Caroline just said really chimes with me. Sitting in local authority as we are, looking at those barriers, trying to work out ways to dismantle them and to move faster is probably the biggest task that anybody sitting in my role has. And it's about how we take people with us to understand why these changes are necessary, what the benefits will be, and how these changes can be absorbed into people's lives. And that's a really difficult task to get across. I think you asked right at the top, Sam, about how we, the audience, how we as a society in general can have confidence that we won't repeat mistakes. I think there's, local authorities are a cumbersome beast. We have to break down barriers between different departments. For example, roads department are often doing something, and then the active travel team comes in and goes, wait a minute, we need to make a change here. There are those kinds of issues that sit, I think, in almost any organisation. I suspect Transport Scotland has some of that as well. It's about how do we break that down to ensure that the conversations that need to take place before we take anything out to the public are absolutely correct, between the right people, everybody's pulling in the same direction for that fast action that Caroline was talking about, and that is so necessary. I hope that, certainly in terms of Edinburgh and some other local authorities as well, that the people who are watching the progressive change that's come in the last 5 years, I would say, needs to be built on. I hope that people will recognise that it's been quite hard won, but I know that in Edinburgh's case, we have put in place now all of our key strategies. But it is, I think Caroline was the one who was challenging me right at the start when she was doing her piece, which is that, yeah, great strategies are fantastic, but if they sit on a shelf, they're no use to anybody. And it's about how we switch from strategy to implementation and delivery and demonstrate that really clearly. Our next administrative term should be all about that. I'm going to make a wildly blatant political plug here, which is that if you actually care about active travel, if you care about the change that can bring, if you care about reducing the impact of vehicular movements in our cities or our towns, take yourself and look at the progressive policies that you can get from certain political parties and look to put your energies behind that, because it's absolutely necessary that we start to reduce those loud voices I talked about before, which we know across the general population do not have majority support. So yes, so I'm going to stop. Now I'm being told to be quiet by Sam, so I will do what I'm told. But essentially that is what we're looking at. Support us, get us through some of the difficult pieces, write to the newspapers, talk to your neighbours, talk about the benefits that can come forward. And that's one way that the audience, the wider society, can support the people who are trying to effect real positive change in their communities.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lesley. You weren't far off 3 minutes, that's grand. Patrick, over to you.
Thanks very much. At Holyrood, we don't have an election coming up this year, so I don't need to be quite that blatant, but there is a serious point there about on whose behalf are these decisions being made, and how do people perceive these decisions? Do people perceive them to be something that's done to their communities, whether it's by the council, by the Scottish government, by political parties, by some sort of, all-powerful cycling mafia that it only exists in the fever dreams of the Daily Mail headline writers, or do they perceive these changes as something they're participating in, something that they can shape? If we get that right, then yes, people will vote for folk who support those policies, but also they'll be far more likely to use the infrastructure that we build, to use the services that we provide, and to go along with changing their behaviour, even if they found that difficult to think about the first time it was raised. Can I sit here and say I've got the magic solution that guarantees that we'll get this right and that we won't end up making mistakes? No, I can't. If we carry people with us, then we give ourselves the chance to make this a lasting set of changes, sustainable not only in its objectives, but sustainable in practical reality. If we fail to carry people with us, then yeah, we'll be booted out of office, and or we'll be replaced even within existing political parties will change their positions because they don't think it's popular anymore, and the thing will fall apart. So it's down to us all to make it work and to try and bring people with us. Maybe people who don't yet feel that this is part of something that's relevant to them. Maybe people who don't yet feel that they can see anything in this for them. Caroline ended by talking about children, and I was reminded of a talk I heard from a mayor of a European city who'd already made dramatic changes. This was a few years ago now, and a big part of her pitch was where we started was to think about our city from the point of view of a child, and to start making every decision informed by that perspective. And yeah, if we do that right, then that old cartoon about, you know, maybe climate change was a con and we just made the world a better place for no reason, that's kind of relevant as well, because this is about livable, healthy, happy, fun places to be, as much as it's about CO2 parts per million, because, you know, that's critical, getting that climate change agenda. But people relate to the former. They relate to how their community feels to live in. So yeah, I'm excited about what we're going to do. If I'm up to my 3 minutes, I'll just share one final point, which is that I've already had my first FOI request asking how many times in the first 6 months in my job did I use a ministerial limousine, and I'm delighted that the people who put in that request were very disappointed to know that the answer was none. I can get about on a bike as a minister. More ministers should be doing that. People in all sorts of walks of life should be doing that. And if we do that, if we lead by example and show how it can be done and how it can be fun, then we will give ourselves a good chance to make this progress and make it lasting progress.
Thank you, Patrick. You were spot on 3 minutes, and then you went on a bit. But your point about leadership, I think, is very real, because I'm not going to speak for 3 minutes. It's been a real privilege to kind of convene this discussion, and I apologies to those of you whose questions I didn't get to, but I hope you found value in the conversation and the discussion. My point is kind of similar in many respects. It's that we need to build the momentum, and the momentum is done through practice, it's done through delivery. As Lesley says, we've got the strategies, we've got the plans in place, Fred, and we've got a great team in place to kind of take it forward. We've got a really engaged civic society. We just need to build the evidence, and as Patrick was saying, doing it with people, not to people, because ultimately this infrastructure and this transition, which is massive, let's not play about, this is a significant reorientating of how we move about and how we live within our cities, has to be done with people if it is going to be bought into. But for me, the critical thing is, like, having been in London the week during the half term, it's the tangibility, the feeling of it, the seeing it in practice, just brings it home, and it builds that kind of confidence across the city that this is actually a real benefit for everybody. So that would be my last comment. I'm now going to, so thank you to all three of you, to Caroline, to Lesley, and to the Minister Patrick. It's very much appreciated. Thanks to all of you who posted questions, some 27 in total. Really appreciate all of those. And I'll now hand over to Martin, who's going to sum it up for the evening, I think. Thank you very much, Martin.
Thanks very much, Sam. You did a great job there with the Q&A. We'll be knocking on your door again, I think. And thanks very much to everyone in the audience for coming along. We had 80 people here most of the time. We've still got 65 here, so well done for hanging on to the end. And thanks very much for your questions. We will publish them in the meeting report and pass them on to our speakers. And thank you very much, Lesley, Caroline and Patrick, for all you've contributed to tonight. I feel that if you were the team that were responsible for making this happen, then we'd be in good hands. So I hope that you're able to do your bit as part of the bigger team that are putting it all together. I'd just like to put in a quick plug for the InfoSisters bike ride on the 11th of March. You'll find information everywhere on the web, I'm sure. This is a ride to promote safer cycling, basically, I think. And Patrick, you'd be very welcome to come and join us as well. And I think that's it. We've got our hustings coming up in March on the 28th. And if you're not a spokesmember, then please join up, and then we'll keep you informed of what's going on, and you can add your voice to the work that we're doing. And without further ado, I'll leave it there. Thanks, everybody.